listening to Mornings with Zerlina, right here on SiriusXM Progress.
Welcome back to Mornings with Zerlina. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan represents Virginia's 4th District and is the first Black Congresswoman from the state of Virginia. Good morning. Thank you so much for being back with us.
Good morning, Zerlina.
So today is the 51st anniversary of Roe versus Wade, and we were just talking with Jennifer Klein from the White House about what's at stake in this particular moment. And you on the House floor talked about your own pregnancy journey. And I wanted to start there because I think that when our elected representatives talk about their own lived experiences and how certain policy decisions impact real lives from their own perspectives, it really hits close to home. So talk a bit about your own journey.
Yeah, so I was a policymaker when I got pregnant. I was the first member of the Virginia House of Delegates to be pregnant while in office. And I had to know everything that could go right and everything that could go wrong. And that process and talking to my doctor about some of the patients that she had seen really opened my eyes to the practical impacts that abortion restrictions have on miscarriage management or when things go wrong in a pregnancy. And I started telling those stories and was surprised how many people would stop me and say that happened to me. Then when I got pregnant with my daughter, I had a high risk pregnancy. I had placenta previa. My placenta ruptured 9 weeks before my due date. And it was I had the peace of mind of knowing that in that moment in the emergency room, my doctor could do what she felt was best to save a life rather than having to worry about, if this goes wrong, will I be prosecuted? And I think we have seen what has happened post Dobbs, where doctors are hesitating, where hospitals are telling patients we cannot provide the care you need to save your life until you're septic. And we have seen where patients who have to make very difficult decisions now have politicians inserted in those decisions rather than making those decisions in consultation with their doctor. And we've now seen it. I warned about it 13 years ago, but now we see it happening, particularly in Texas and other places that have abortion bans.
I mean, let's talk about some of the cases. I mean, Kate Cox is one of the cases that comes to mind out of Texas, but also Brittany Watts, who was not prosecuted, thankfully, because a grand jury decided not to indict her. But she was in court, had to go through the process of showing up in court and dealing with a potential case for a miscarriage. I mean, talk a bit about just I feel like, when we were before even Dobbs, we had a special where we talked about the implications of the overturning of Roe, and Nancy Northup from the Center for Reproductive Rights was there. And we talked about the criminalization of miscarriages and how that was a potential outcome if Roe was overturned. And people kind of were like, what? Whoa, but now we're living that.
We are. And not only are we living, if you have a miscarriage, you can be prosecuted, but we see state legislatures wanting to invade your privacy and get access to your menstruation data in order to potentially prosecute you for a crime if you do have a miscarriage. And before coming to Congress, I was in the state Senate last year about this time, and there was a bill in our Judiciary Committee, seeking access to menstruation data. And it was so clear from the men on the committee that they didn't understand how menstruation worked. They didn't understand how a woman's reproductive system works. And that as a result, not only were they putting these dangerous bills in place, disrupting the doctor-patient relationship, but they were putting our very personal, private data at risk at a time when we would be facing the worst moment of our life, the worst moment of your life, then to be re-victimized. And again, I remember when Virginia passed the ultrasound requirement for an
Mm-hmm.
abortion, thinking about my friend who suffered fetal demise in the seventh month of pregnancy, had to get a D&C, which is an abortion. And that bill would have required her to go back to the doctor after finding out this devastating news, be given an ultrasound for no reason, be asked if she wants to look at it, and be asked if she wants to listen to a heartbeat that wasn't there. For what purpose? And that's what we're seeing.
It's so hard to think about the turmoil and just the amount of trauma placed upon people by politicians, as you said, right? Because it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, for 51 years, we had access to the full slate of reproductive health care. But talk a bit about how folks are quite angry. And I think this issue is visceral. As I was talking with Jennifer Klein about, it's about bodily autonomy. I was talking
Mhm.
to Senator Warren also in the show earlier, and I feel like there's a lot of anger out there over the implications, as we're discussing, of this decision. Talk a bit about how you think we can channel that anger in a productive way into perhaps more political power.
Well, that's exactly right. And first, let me, for me personally, I am angry because I am the first member of my family to lose a constitutional right in my lifetime.
Mm,
I am angry because my daughter, when she faces, when she enters her childbearing years, could have fewer rights and fewer options than I did when she was born. And that makes me livid. And I turn that anger into political action because voting is key. We have got to elect um, representatives at every level, including prosecutors who will decide whether to prosecute women who have
mm-hmm,
had abortions. We need to put people in place who recognize and honor the notion that health care decisions should be made between patients and their providers. We can't leave it there, though. We have to pay attention to what bills are being introduced and make our voices heard. Because remember, in Virginia, that ultrasound requirement was legal under
mm-hmm,
Roe.
mm-hmm,
Banning Medicaid funding in the case of fetal abnormalities was legal under Roe, but still led to devastating consequences. And it was only because women showed up and told their stories that we were able to prevent some of the most egregious restrictions and we were able to repeal the restrictions that we had in place. So it is important to vote. It's important to mobilize, but it's also important to pay attention to what is being introduced because Republicans will try to wrap these bills up as something reasonable when they're
mm-hmm,
not. And it's not until you really read the language and
mm-hmm.
start asking questions about, well, what does this practically mean, that you can expose how extreme these proposals are.
That's a very, very important point because, in a lot of ways, the way that we've got here is that a lot of these laws are written in a very vague way on purpose so that it doesn't seem like it's as big a threat as it actually is. But in 2023, you mentioned elections. In 2023, Virginia had elections where abortion was a central issue. Governor Youngkin was talking about implementing a ban, and that was a central focus of the campaign. And Virginia Democrats came out successful in part because they leaned into a post-Dobbs world. We're going to protect abortion rights. Can you talk a bit about what we can glean from that success by Virginia Democrats and take into the 2024 elections? What can we learn about what happened in Virginia, from what happened in Virginia?
Well, not, in Virginia and also across the country, a
Mm-hmm,
majority of people believe that abortion should be legal. And here in Virginia, they either, you know, wanted our laws to stay as they are now or be less restrictive. And we've
mm-hmm,
seen that time and time again, even in Republican states. And so here, Virginia is a safe haven for abortion. We are the only state between Nevada and the Atlantic Ocean in the South that does not have a ban or very extreme restrictions that puts abortion out of reach. And we talked about that. If we lose Virginia to a ban, if we lose that safe haven, then women's lives will be at risk, reproductive health, reproductive freedom will be gone in most of the country. And as you said, people are viscerally angry about that government will insert itself in the most private healthcare decisions, and the most basic parental right of when and whether to become a parent.
You mentioned your daughter, and I think it's important to talk a bit about how your daughter has fewer rights than you did growing up. And, so many young people, and Gen Z in particular, they're very upset and angry, as we've been discussing, about this decision. And it's all coming in a moment where there's this huge demographic shift happening in the country. And there's obviously a response to that. And in your intro, I mentioned you were the first Black congresswoman from Virginia. So you represent, in a lot of ways, you embody this shift towards a more diverse representation. Talk a bit about how we can become a multiracial democracy, but we have to go through some of these growing pains. And I feel like the attack on reproductive freedom is a part of that.
Well, I go back to what John Lewis said in his final words to us, and that is democracy is not a state. It is an action that requires every generation to do its part to build the beloved community. Democracy in and of itself is not the end goal. It's what you do with it, but you've got to protect it. And if you look back throughout history, when you make progress, that's not the end of the story. There's always a backlash, whether it's racial progress, whether it's reproductive health, whether it's, you know, labor rights. There's always a backlash, and you have to be constantly vigilant to protect not only democracy, but what you are using it to achieve and that progress. And we're in that backlash now, on a wide variety of issues, but particularly reproductive health. And how did we get here? It was based on the 2016 election. Who got elected? Donald Trump. The judges that he appointed, who he brags about, were the ones that overturned Roe. And I think sometimes humanity, we as human beings think, well, we've struggled and we've made progress and it's done. The struggle is constant and it's tiring, but you look back at how much progress you've made and how it can all go away, and that fuels you, and that anger about it going away should fuel you to keep fighting for the next generation, so that when they fight, they do so from a position of strength.
In the last 2 minutes here, how are you staying hopeful and optimistic in the fight for more freedoms?
Well, I don't have any choice. You know, I look at my daughter and I say she is my hope. And to make sure, you know, I'm already fighting from a position of more strength than my mother or my grandmother or my great grandmother ever did. So that progress gives me hope. And looking at her and knowing everything I do will make it possible for her to struggle less gives me hope.
Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, the first Black congressman from the state of Virginia, represents Virginia's 4th District. Thank you so much for being with us on this 51st anniversary of Roe. This whole hour has been focused on that anniversary and all of the consequences of the Dobbs decision. Such an important conversation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.